So I think we should start. So let me just do a quick intro, just to get everyone sort of up to speed on what we're doing today.
Thank you, Bill. Let's go.
All right. So today's webinar: Grow Your Exports and Business in the American West. And I did touch upon it earlier. I don't know who caught the preamble there, but the American West, it's a huge area. And I know Susanna's going to get into that a little later, but if you simply looked at California as a country, it is way up there in terms of the all the nations across the world, and that is, of course, just one state within the West. So it's a huge area. It definitely warrants its own focus. There are different cultures, different focus. So I'm really excited to hear this particular presentation, to see how we can kind of hone in on the West as a region. Very quickly, in terms of IPT partners, we are very clear in our objective. We believe that effective use of the internet and using localized sites and localized online marketing puts exporters in the driving seat of their international business development, and effectively allows everyone to compete on an even footing with local companies. So we think that is a critical element now of export development, and everything we focus on is geared towards that. And many of you have been on webinars of ours before, so welcome back. And in today's webinar, Susanna Hardy, who is IPT Partners European Business Director, will outline the American West as we see it from an online perspective, and using online tools to target those markets. So just before we dive in, a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to run this for about 20 minutes and try and leave some time, maybe 10 minutes for questions at the end, so we can get you back to your desks in about a half hour. I'm going to have everybody on mute for the duration of the presentation, but if you have questions, please send them over using the chat box in the GoToWebinar sidebar there. And then we will, of course, mail the deck out to all attendees, and within a couple of days, a recording will be available up on our website, so you can do it all over again if you like. So hold on a second. Let's see if Susanna is ready. I'm going to hand over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Bill. So we're really going to get straight into the meat of the matter, as it were. A little tiny introduction just about sort of online world, and then we're going to talk about the U.S. West, both the opportunities and some of the issues that have been that we've found doing business there, and then some of the big hot trends that we're seeing. And then we're going to go a bit more into the country-specific websites and how to sort of tips to how to get you started on that. This is very much a top-down approach. It's a very short, succinct webinar. We have, as Bill said, a whole series of webinars that drill down into very specific ranges, and I would just like to take this opportunity to highlight the one in January we're having on VAT, and this is absolutely essential, some of the changes that have happened in VAT legislation for Europe. So anyone, for our American clients in particular, anyone selling into Europe that's affected by VAT, will be interested in this webinar, and we have a guest speaker on that. Anyway, so getting back to today's topic, we really wanted to start with just a few things as a few sort of truisms for us, and as Bill was pointing out, we have this very firm commitment and firm view. We've been in this helping companies export for about 15 years now as a company, and some time ago, we actually found that websites solved a lot of those problems that mid-sized companies have when they're exporting, in terms of the visibility and the accessibility and things, and the outreach to clients, and whether that's B2B models or B2C models. But there's a couple of myths that we just wanted to make sure we were all clear on as well. I'm sure you're totally aware of these myths, but the key one that we really wanted to focus on is not all Googles are the same. So just because you have google.co.uk website does not mean that you are well referenced or have a similar rating in the US market. The language looks the same. It's not totally the same. It's referenced differently. Google references it differently. And because Because of that, the search engine optimization that Google implies is very country specific. So even your search engine, your SEO that you've done in the UK is not going to be the same as it is in the US, and certainly not if you're going from east to west coast. As Bill was pointing out earlier, there are significant differences between east and west coast, and obviously the middle as well. The third little sort of just the myth I wanted to sort of bring out there is that social media today has got to be a key part of anybody's strategy for exporting and e-commerce and for internationalization. So before we get on to talking about the United States itself in the West, I don't know if you want to do a poll now, Bill? Is that now or later?
Yeah, no, so that's a great call. So what I had omitted to say at the beginning was that we're going to run, I think, 4 polls during this webinar just to see where you guys are all at. And this first poll is really, I'm going to launch it now onto your screens. And Susanna's about to dive in and talk about the US and kind of how you get in there and focusing on the West. But just interested to know what are your routes to market. And I know we have a couple of consultants on the line today, so please feel free to respond as if you were your client. I think that'll be the best way to approach that. So Susanna, we have 67%. I'm going to wait for a couple. We've got a couple more people that need to vote. Thank you for your contributions, and interesting. So we're getting very good support on the distributor agent model, not so much on the direct to end client. But let me close that and share those results. Everyone can take a look. So this is. Oh, we had actually a last follow up for the direct to end client. So Susanna, we have about 50% via distributors, about 50% direct to end client, and only about 25% via the internet and e-commerce. So interesting stuff.
Okay, right. Well, in terms of the U.S., we just want to say the U.S. is really ideal for country-specific websites, and launching a U.S. Targeted website. Not only is it large and prosperous, it's an easy to do business, it's also pretty well plugged in. And it's very open to new ideas and new concepts, particularly through the internet. There's a couple of things we wanted to draw your attention to in terms of diversification within the United States. Legislation, as well as taxes, payment methods, all those type of details can be different by region and even by state. So at the state level, there are differences, for example, between even California and Nevada for payment systems, let alone the infrastructure, which we'll get onto a little bit later, which is so important for how you run a website. So getting on to the West itself, a quick sort of snapshot. In the top left-hand corner, you'll see a sort of color-coded map of the United States. That whole dark green part, half, is what we call the West. And it's obviously got the strong coastal area, Washington, Oregon, California, but it also includes those middle states like Utah, Arizona, Nevada, and so on. And it's, these are if you work out the GDP of these combined states, it's something like more or less 6 trillion. That's equivalent to Germany, which is like 3.5 trillion, and the UK 2.5 trillion combined. So if you're thinking about how much do I allocate to my Germany, if I'm exporting to Germany, how much do I allocate to my Germany budget? Think how much you need to allocate just for the U.S. West to get a similar return. And then I wanted to sort of just list the levels of leadership positions that a lot of these states have in major industries, and obviously just begun to scratch the surface of which ones. Now, getting down a little bit also into the West, as it were, there were 3 real things that I wanted to draw your attention on. And I'm sure that most of you know this, but it's nice to put a stamp on it. Did you want to do another poll?
Yeah, Susanna, I was just thinking, just before you dive into that, let's see the extent to which people are focused on certain regions. So let's run this poll. So I'd love to know who's focused in which areas. Have you thought about this? Do you see the US just as one major area, or do you have focus? So Interesting mix so far. I think one of the things here is, of course, Europe tends to look to the East Coast more than it does to the West Coast, which is, I think, being reflected already. So I have pretty much everyone voting. Thank you so much. So here are the results. So guess what, Susanna? We have nobody who's currently focused on the American West.
Okay.
Three-quarters of our attendees today say they're doing everything, but in terms of having a specific focus on the West, we have nobody. So I think this is clearly a perfect webinar for everybody. I'm going to send it back to you, Susanna.
Thank you. The U.S. West is just over a third of total U.S. GDP. How about that? There were a couple of little numbers I just wanted to throw at you just to sort of highlight or make my point. First of all is that the West is very wealthy. It has pockets of extreme poverty too. There's also it's an unjust society. There's an internet gap, all kinds of things. But they've got over 130 billionaires just in California. And then I found this amazing little map done by Forbes of ultra high net worth individuals, this more than $30 million, and how many of them are in California or Nevada and so on. So that's kind of a fun little map. And then the middle thing here, this pie chart, just shows you the level of venture capital and private equity available in the West. And just really to open, just to stress my point that it is a very open society, a very a very innovative environment. Where people sort of, are very open to new ideas, but there's a lot of competition there as well. So, and the third slide, that little sort of yellow map on the right-hand side, just gives you an indication of the level of Spanish speakers. And so that's 41 million people speak Spanish and pretty well very little English, and 11 million in addition are bilingual. In that area, and obviously it trends towards the sort of southern borders. But nonetheless, if you're looking at the West, you do need to take into account, especially if you're a B2C model, you do need to take into account a Spanish dimension. So I wanted to put out a couple of sort of opportunities there, but also perhaps just list a few challenges. With that bounty and wealth comes the fact that there's an awful lot of choice, and it's a very competitive environment. The West, perhaps even more so than many other parts of the United States. I personally believe that the West they respond very well to quality, but it's a very competitive environment. And I just wanted to give you that little list of saying, in terms of, for example, just in the Bay Area, there's something like 14,000 startups every year. So it's just an amazing choice of new companies coming up. The other challenge about doing business in the West is that, okay, this is a broad generalization, but especially around California and the coastal areas, it is expensive. It's more expensive than most of the rest of the United States, without a doubt. And parts of it are very expensive indeed, particularly things like the Bay Area, San Francisco, and LA. The third part really is that it is very large, as Bill was saying earlier. If you go from north to south or whatever, San Diego to Seattle is 1,200 miles. That's the equivalent of driving from London to Stockholm. It's a long way. And if you have any kind of an e-commerce or a model, that is an important factor to put into your mix, because how are you going to do fulfillment services and so on? And even if you've got a distributor model, one distributor for that large space is going to have a lot of difficulty, particularly as it is extremely diverse in terms of geographic area. And then I couldn't help just mention, it is an area as well, this is a challenge, I personally think, so for the longer term. It is very environmentally sensitive, huge drought issues, huge water issues, and of course, lots of earthquakes. Now, talking about the West online, and what do we mean by this, and how, and this is obviously a very key characteristic for looking at how you want to play an internet strategy. It's obviously extremely online, and virtually invented much of the internet, and is the core driver of Apple, Google, Facebook, and so on. but it is very patchy. It is, for someone living in a very dense environment like Europe, I look at much of the West Coast, and I'm amazed at still how many parts of it have poor internet connection, even around the San Francisco area or Northern California. So there are parts of it where you have to be quite wary. There's some big initiatives going on at the moment to drive up the amount of broadband and the West Coast infrastructure, sort of the hardware, as it were. So there is some investment going on to do. It's not a given that there is good internet access everywhere. In fact, I'd argue there's actually better internet access in the Midwest than there is in the West. But in terms of concepts, trends, and the new thing, there I think the West leads much of the world, both in terms of e-commerce and cross-border sales. And e-commerce, obviously, we all know it's growing enormously. But I want to point out one thing that interested me. The e-commerce continues to grow very large, but we always think of it as a B2C naturally. But B2B is obviously significantly larger. B2B is about twice the size of B2C. And the other characteristic that I just highlighted on this slide is the sort of cross-border. It is a growing phenomenon across all big e-commerce markets. The West of the USA does buy directly from Southeast Asia, China, and obviously sort of Canada and Mexico. So there is a growing amount of looking around at other sites and other areas for good access to products. The third major trend that I wanted to highlight here was the mobile-enabled, or Mcommerce. And I think it was very interesting in Thanksgiving. The U.S. celebrated Thanksgiving at the very end of November. And this Thanksgiving, it's a huge shopping experience. It's become like, one of those big shopping weekends. And this year, for the first time ever, Mcommerce exceeded e-commerce on fixed platforms. So more people shopped by telephone in e-commerce than shopped by their PC at home. So this is it's got a rather dreadful name. It's often being called an Uberification of e-commerce. So that's an interesting thing as well. Now remember, Google also did some changes in its ranking in April of this year and made a separate ranking for mobile, which I think is also quite indicative of where things are going. So again, any strategy going forward in terms of international export has to include some kind of Mcommerce. Now, just getting back into e-commerce specifically, whether it's B2B or B2C, a couple of major things we would say about e-commerce. And Bill, did you want to do a poll now or later? Neither, perhaps.
I was on. Okay. No, I was on mute, keeping myself quiet.
Okay.
Yeah, let's run a quick one now, because you were just talking about Mcommerce and e-commerce. So let's quickly do this here. I'd love to know to what extent people are currently using e-commerce as a primary route to market. Are you currently using? Are you planning to go there? And also, are your sites actually set up for mobile? So just waiting for a few votes to come in here. So of course, if you're set up for mobile, then you're probably also currently using. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, thank you so much. That's everyone in. So our results, let's share those results. So we have 60% of you are planning to use e-commerce. So I think from my point of view, if you listened, picked up on what Susanna was saying and how important business-to-business e-commerce is, whether that's PC-based, tablet-based, mobile-based, if you are in that planning stage, there is so much going on there that I will consider it as a critical part of business development. So with that, back to you, Susanna.
Thank you very much, Bill. So just to sort of say, we tried to sort of summarize. There are basically, as far as we've been concerned with our clients, 4 different ways of looking at B2B and B2C e-commerce. The first is basically to look at existing e-commerce platforms. And there are pros and cons of this. And again, you don't have to take notes of all this because it's very, very dense text, and we'll be giving you all of this by handout anyway. But that's certainly one way to go about it. It has some major disadvantages, though. Basically, it's a real it comes down to the lowest common denominator. It comes down to price at the end. The other one is to give over everything to your distributor, and I was intrigued that many of you have a distributor model. We would really recommend that you think very hard about before you give your international website presence over to your distributor. It's basically handing them your brand, and that is a tricky thing to do, and a very tricky thing to get out of if it ever goes wrong. The third sort of strategy that we've come across is sort of plugins, where we'd say, you know, these are in a sense a do-it-yourself type, and we just find they have a lot of disadvantages. They look good in the beginning because it's real cheap, but a lot of disadvantages. And then for us, it's the country-specific websites, which in the long term are by far the most profitable and beneficial way of building your brand, reaching your end clients, maintaining control of your client and of your sales process. So that is, you know, as Bill was saying, that's sort of the space that we occupy. So now getting into, you know, that sort of, you know, our view, you know, building a site and using your site, it really is for us a key driver for export development and internationalization. So a couple of things that we would say just to get you started in the U.S. and in internationalization. The first is obviously to own your domain name, and if you've got a .co.uk, you really should think about getting the .com. These are not expensive. They're about 10 to 15, 20 pounds max. And if you don't have it, then you could have major problems. Like Disney, for example, with the launch of Star Wars this week in the UK. They were trying to get their starwars.co.uk domain name, and they couldn't because it was owned by some tiny little store in Brighton, and they had to pay the store a large amount of money to get this. It was finally resolved in August of this year. But can you imagine, it was, you know, the bite of Disney versus this little shop owner in Brighton, and the Brighton shop owner was winning just because of, you know, he was just holding out for more money. And that's the kind of example that you could have. Just make sure that you own your domain names in your important markets. And the next really comes back in the sense that we were talking about earlier. If you've got a UK site, make sure that it feels right in the United States. And here's some examples of the kind of, it's really tweaking. We don't, you know, not all companies can be as sophisticated as Jaguar's advertisement on the left-hand side with James Bond, mean business, and on the right-hand side for the U.S. market, it says at your service. So these are very, very subtle differences in markets and in market priorities, with the U.S. very much more focused on the service, and Bond, you know, adding the extra layer to the UK market for sort of the for their image. So again, you know, that's really, it's about localizing your content. And we for example work with a truck company, and you know, their website is full of words like lorry, and sitting out there in California, you have no idea what they're talking about. What is a lorry? So that's why I put localization with a capital Z in capitals there. It is about making sure that things fit your local market, even the difference between a UK audience and a US audience, and that seems particularly so in the West Coast. A little tip as well we can say is make sure that you are absolutely coherent and up to date with any rules and regulations. This goes for both the internet and for other import-export rules and regulations. There's nothing that hurts trust more than knowing that your supplier doesn't know the rules and regulations. It makes you feel very, very poor indeed. The next thing, once you've got that domain name, once you've made sure that you are perfectly attuned to the local market, is to make sure that you're really being found, and that has to do, like I said earlier, making sure that you are search engine optimized for the local market. And it gets back to that point that Google does country-specific geolocation, and therefore you should too. So it's worth bearing in mind. Again, a little tip as well, videos. Videos are a great way as well of boosting your ranking with Google. Google likes them very much, so we would encourage you to use videos. It's very easy. Use videos on your website. in terms of search engine optimization, as I said, it is very different in every market, and it's really about using those local keywords. And we put in a few little tips and boosters as we found it. And the single biggest attribute that Google looks for is quality content. That you can actually really engage by very value-added content. So you've got to make sure that your audience really wants to find you and stay with you, and that Google then will recognize that and reward you with ranking. And just a little tip as well, engaging with good quality links is always a good thing as well. Again, helps your ranking for that quite a bit.
So Susanna, we've talked a little bit about that. Let's run our last poll right now.
Okay.
And when we talk about country specific, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, do you have the local URLs? Are they multilingual? And we'd like to think about multilingual here, and have you adapted your language to the US, for example? And I hope you're picking up from this conversation that if your client base or your prospect base is in the west of the US, you really do need to have a separate look and feel to your site than if your prospect base was on the East Coast. Very different mindsets, very different belief structures in general. So you would need to think about that in terms of your optimization and your approaches. So I think everyone is focused here, and we've got a lot of votes. We're a lot of multilingual, and wait for a couple more. There, I think we're good. That's mostly everyone. So let me share that with everybody. Thank you for the results. So we have, actually this, I think, for Susanna, of all the webinars we've done, we have 80% of people online today who have multilingual websites, which I think is which I think is a record.
That is a record, yes.
Yeah, and we have 40% each with localized URLs and localized social media adapted. So I think that is awesome. I take my hat off to you guys, and back to you,
Well
Susanna.
done. Then you're well on the way. I wanted to talk very briefly about social media. Obviously, in the West, social media is ubiquitous, and the West Coast uses Facebook as a way, let alone LinkedIn and all the others, but it even uses Facebook, tweets, all possible social media platforms to promote their businesses and to engage with their clients. It's just part of any structure. Even the local coffee shop is doing it. And I wanted to make sure that you're all aware of the latest new thing in the West Coast. We're hearing a lot about it at the moment. It's called WeChat. It's owned by Tencent, which is a Chinese outfit, a Chinese internet service portal, and they own something called, they've developed something called WeChat. WeChat, the end objective of WeChat is to combine, it's like a Skype, it's a voice over internet protocol. It's an instant payment, so it's kind of like a Skype plus a PayPal plus a Facebook plus a Twitter account all rolled in one. There you go. So that's the latest thing coming out, and people are signing up very quickly indeed in the West. I can tell you about that. So then, when should you engage in this in the U.S. websites in U.S. and particularly in the West? Well, we thought one good opportunity, one thing we see a lot of clients doing is taking the opportunity of saying, well, we've got a huge trade show in Las Vegas, so maybe we should do something there. We're investing X number of thousands for our site, for our stand, for our first people going there for a week. How about actually making some inroads on our digital space, our online space, and promoting us? It is a very, very good thing. When I've written there, country-specific website marketing, 40% more leads, this is, numbers are numbers. It's worth what it's worth, but that's from our personal background and our personal findings that we've had with clients, and particularly with engaging with specific events like trade shows. So if you've got a trade show coming up, particularly in the West, in this very, very web tech savvy place, then definitely think about your online presence and how you can promote yourself for that. And one of the best things about the web, of course, is that you can measure it. So basically, you just sort of, define what the objectives are, and then your business model obviously, will change or modify that, and then you can actually, implement it and tweak it where it needs tweaking and make sure it's really working for you. I've given a table here of some of the tools that we use, from mods to Get Clicky and so on, and what they're all used for. We'll use a whole range of them, and I think it is a good practice to use several and do it. We for example, for our clients, we'll do a major review on a monthly basis using lots of different platforms to see what the real scoring is of their websites. And what's great is that you can easily measure it and then change it if it's not working. So just to get back to our core message, exporters should really rely and must rely on in today's world on country-specific websites to help them grow their business and nationally. It just saves a lot of money, a lot of time, solves a lot of problems, and it's the way to go forward. So we would really encourage your business in the United States to make sure that your website in the United States is really functioning optimally. We have also, as I mentioned, a whole series of webinars coming up, and the next one is on VAT, which we will highlight to you there. And then I think that's it for me, really. Do we have time for some questions, Bill?
Susanna, that was awesome. Yes, by the way, I meant to thank you guys during the course of the presentation. Thanks for getting those questions into me. I have, Susanna, I think probably, I am aware of time, but there are at least a couple of questions here that I think will be really good just to nail right now. The first one is, I'm going to flesh this out a little bit, but basically what's saying is, if I already have a .com site that I use for the UK, can I use this for the US also? So it's interesting because a lot of people in the UK do use .com sites anyway. But how, is that, can you just use the same site for the US? I think is the question. Do you want to answer that one, Susanna, or would you like me to?
Well, why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
Or whatever you like, Bill.
No, that's fine. So from the interesting thing about this is it's not about the language. Having a site and using the online presence to grow your business overseas is not just about the language. If you are doing a lot of social media, for example, in the UK, and you're also trying to develop your Western US market, then your Facebook activity in the UK, for example, is not going to be getting you any traction in the US. Similarly, for example, you need to look really closely at your metadata, your meta tagging, your keywords. If you're using an English-focused vocabulary, Susanna used the lorry truck example, but even the ZS model will throw Google out completely in terms of the perception of US versus UK. So if you have prospects in San Francisco searching for you, and you haven't optimized your sites for the US market, then your traction and your visibility is going to be much lower. And I guess the third thing is, and this didn't come up in the question, but we do find it quite a lot. People say, well, Bill, how about, can I do like a pay-per-click campaign focused on the US and then kind of pushing people back to my UK site? You absolutely can. That is a way to do it. We would see that as a tactical, short-term approach. It's very binary. When you're paying for it, it's doing things for you. When you're not paying for it, it's done. And also, we find it gets quite expensive in the long run compared to, for example, localizing your social media, which has a much sort of stickier effect. So I think that hopefully that addresses that one. Second question, Susanna, over to you on for this one. You mentioned using video. Can you talk a little bit about video and SEO as it would pertain to the West?
Video is excellent. People do not want to read, unlike my PowerPoint presentation, people do not want to read lots of text. What they want to have increasingly are videos, and no place more so than the West Coast of the States. attention spans have shrunk. People just want a quick answer to their questions, and preferably they want it spoken to them in a video. It's really easy to get, you know, satisfactory quality video onto a website. You could do it with any iPhone, and then just top and tail it a little bit. And you could even use it. It works really well for international, for multilingual sites, because what you'll do, it's perfectly acceptable to have that in English, have the client testimonial or the product explanation in English, and then put, say, Spanish subtitles. You know, that is so effective. We've done that a lot of times, and it's really effective. And of course, Google gives you lots of points for that, so you'll find yourself boosted in the Google rankings just for having it. And as I said, you know, I think any director of sales should equip their sales force with, you know, with a basic understanding of how to shoot a video on their iPhones and bring it back and put it up on their website. So definitely do it.
Great. Susanna, thank you. I'm just thinking of time here. There are a couple more questions, but actually what I'll do is I'll shoot those